Good afternoon and welcome. I just want to try and get that conversation that I had with Larry off of my screen. So I'm going to talk a moment even though I'm here by myself. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Leading Educators of Students with Dyslexia. Let's try that again.
Okay, let me adjust some volume.
I can hear you now. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Little by little.
Yeah, so sorry that took a little bit. I switched to some older technology, and so hopefully that'll work. Any setup issues or anything that I can assist with right now?
I don't think so, but I am thrilled to have you. I have my speaker notes will be in front of the chat things. So although I don't really use my notes much, it's how I advance. That way I don't have to come over here and make this little thing come up and everything. And it's a good reminder. I mean, so hence I may not be able to see chat or Q&A if things come up.
Okay, well, I'll watch that. And let's just see. I'll probably, let me see if this works I'll probably just mute and keep my camera off.
Can you keep it on?
Oh, that's fine. Sure.
Well, if we have somebody else with a camera on, that's fine. I just like to have at least someone, just so I can get nonverbal feedback.
Got it. Well, I'll be here for the duration.
Thank you.
So I'll just unmute. I'll leave it up, and I know that there's a limit with Hopin as far as the number of, like, I can't remember what they call it, stages.
I think it said 20.
Well, as far as like, I think you have up at the top of the screen, you say 3 of 5.
Yes.
So you have 3, and it's not stages. I can't remember what they refer to that as, but like right now there's 3 because you're presenting and we're both on camera.
So, so we can only have.
Yeah, and your participants for the most part won't have their camera on.
Okay.
So the only mug you'll be seeing is mine for the most part.
Okay. What's the little, it looks like an I with the number 4 next to it?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay. It changed when you came in. So it was, I don't know if it's got this, my screen sharing and me and you, but I don't know what the 4th one would be.
Yeah. And usually that other part to the left of that, the 3 of 5 is making reference to, and I think it was, I'm just looking at that little cheat sheet they sent out. So each room is limited to 5 video screens. So the 3 of 5 is saying you're currently using 3 of those. So
we could have 2 other people like share orally and
possibly. I think that the way that they have the participant lane kind of set up is that they come in and not have opportunity to turn their camera on.
Okay.
So I think the separate link that Christina sent us was for like a presenter access that then gives you that opportunity to have camera on or off.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Can they contribute orally though?
They can contribute through the Q&A or the chat.
But not orally?
I don't believe so.
That's too bad. Hi, Karen. I know you can. I hope you can hear us. I just saw that Karen Fradley has joined us.
Okay. I'm going to mute just for a moment, and I'm going to text Andrew very quickly just to confirm about the audio response.
Okay, thanks. I could too, but I won't. I'll be here. Karen, can you put in the chat where you're from? Let me put in our Padlet right now. Let's see if that'll work for me. Oh, there we go. Now I can see your chat reference. Can you click on that Padlet, Karen? And open it. I should create a first one just being tested out. Larry, can you hear me? Can you see the link I put into the chat? And can you test to make sure you can access it? And maybe just add on a little plus and add something?
The link did work. I've got a response here from Andrew, so let me go back to that. Okay. But yeah, so the link worked. So,
well, I'm also thinking, Larry, I think we're supposed to start at 1. And right now it's just the two of us and Karen. And so if it's just going to be Karen, we can have maybe invite her to be video and audio on, and we can have a conversation.
So here's the information from Andrew. My question was, can participants contribute via audio during a session? His response, they can if you want. It's called moderation. They click the share audio and video, and whoever is the moderator must approve. So it's seen at the bottom left, and it's called moderated. So
moderation panel there, yeah. I see it. Okay, let's see if I can get Karen with us. So right now it looks like she's the only person who's joined us. Let's see, moderation panel. Oh, good, there's the link to resource document. That's all I'm seeing. Do you have access to that? Nope.
And Alicia, in clicking on the people tab over on the right-hand side, you have Alicia, Christina, Stephanie, Karen, and Beth.
Fantastic. I don't see Beth. I see Stephanie and Christina as well as myself. Maybe it needs to refresh. Well, that's all right. I'll go ahead and get started anyway, and want to honor people's time, those who are here. And people can come in slowly, and if people come in, we can constantly add to and go back. And I want this to be interactive. Hence, please use the chat. Please use the Q&A. I know this is a different format for us, but we can figure this out, right, everybody? Okay, so welcome. For those of you who are here, like I said, I always think about Romper Room. I see Christina and Stephanie and Karen and Diana. Thank you. There's Beth. All right. At least I can see some faces. I mean, names, if not faces. Very weird system. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. You'll see that I did put a poll in. Let's see if the results are coming in yet. So show results. Yeah, I don't know how to use that poll. So luckily I did put it back up into in a Padlet for us. And because the poll was just asking how much background knowledge do you have about dyslexia? So as people are coming in, please add in a comment there. I can see somebody's added in or starting, thank you. Somebody's adding, I've taken some classes so someone's adding that in for us. And I think because I sent you my link, it's all going to show like it's me, but that's okay. It makes it more anonymous for you. You can see the link to the Padlet in our chat. So I'll give people a moment with that as they come in. Hello, Joshua. Hello, Amanda. Welcome. The link to the Padlet is in the chat. You here. Like if someone's jumping ahead, we'll get there. We're going to do a note-taking exercise. So you feel free to add in if you have some ideas too, but we will be doing some others. Oh, we've got somebody with OG. Fantastic. And someone's been following the Washington law. Thank you. Fantastic. All right. Well, we've only have 2 hours, so this isn't like a 6-hour training, which I often do, but I do want it to make sure that you see that there is a resource document where you'll see more about that. And if you're coming in later, feel free to add in at any time about your background knowledge. And we're going to go in and get started. I'm Alicia Roberts-Frank, and I am with ESD 113 in the Teaching and Learning Department. Technically, I'm the Regional Administrator for Special Programs, but my main hat is as a dyslexia specialist, because that's really what's been keeping me very busy lately, as I'm sure you can understand. We always start with a land acknowledgement, and we have some lovely words that are borrowed from our colleagues at OSPI, acknowledging the tribe's commitment to the resurgence of their traditional ways and their respect and protection of all people, not only those who are living, but also those who have gone before and who are yet to be born. We pay our respect to the elders, both past and present, and to the valued resource the tribe has defined as their children. They are the tribe's future. I acknowledge that you are joining us from all over the state, and we ask that you take a moment to acknowledge the traditional lands wherever you are. You can do that into the chat. Or I should have put a little Padlet piece on that for you as well. Thank you, Michael. At the same time, we've also borrowed from our colleagues at OSPI an acknowledgement of the racial injustice from over 400 years of racism here in the United States. It comes with a pledge to stand with our communities of color, especially those who identify as and/or are categorized as African American. We are committed to leading with racial equity. We offer a moment of silence and honor the space for people from communities of color to respond to this acknowledgement first. Feel free to use the chat box if you would like. We invite accountability and partnership. And thank you for sharing and joining in the chat. Go ahead, Larry.
Alicia, I don't know if you're advancing slides. We're still on your title slide. Is that correct?
No, on mine it shows that we're on the OSPI racial adjustment.
Okay.
And even when I'm looking at it through the platform above your head, it shows. Thanks. Beth shows my OSPI slide. Let me try the next one. Beth, do you now see the teaching and learning beliefs? Michael says no. Still see, maybe it's just got a delay.
Let me reach out. Andrew's been responsive. I'll see if we can get some assistance.
Thank you. Well, at least we're still working on those details. Michael says there it is. So we're getting a little bit of a delay. Now it's stitched. Now it shows the belief. So I think, folks, we're just going to, they said to use Google Slides. Switch. Thank you. There we go, Beth. We're going to do the best we can. And I will invite everyone to some of the free opportunities. Can we have a copy of the presentation? I have not made that into a shareable, but yes, I can. So I will do that and put it into the moderation panel for you afterwards. Right now, if you go into, I think it's the moderation panel or in the description, you can see a link to a resource document. Let's see what happens if I click it and see if it will open up for you to see. It does. So you can see if you click that link, you should get a resource document which has links for everything that I'm sharing and talking about, as well as my contact information and information about free courses that I'm offering through PD Enroller. So Susan, at this point, I have not yet made this ADA compliant. I can do so that I can share it. In the meantime, feel free to take any screenshots or use the clip, snip, and sketches, which I usually do when I'm watching things. All right, so I think that we're working on the technology pieces. but hopefully I'll go slowly as I advance and make sure that things move for you. I just wanted to take a moment to share with you our teaching and learning beliefs so you know what's important to me. The building relationships. This pains me that I can't see your faces and hear your voices, but at least I can read what you are putting on in the chat. That really it's the quality teaching that's really important, that it's your difference, the teacher's difference, it's their knowledge. Research shows again and again that it's not the books and the materials and the curriculum, sure, those are useful tools, but really it's the teachers themselves that make the biggest difference in the classroom. The active engagement, I want opportunities for you to, I miss Zoom where you could draw on the screen and where I could put you in breakout rooms, but that's why I'm going to use the Padlet for some active engagement for you. And then of course the professional development, which is tied into the growth mindset because we're always learning. And of course, above all else, when given the opportunity, all students can learn. So I'm just going to check and make sure. Someone give me a thumbs up that we are now on the FOSI agenda-ish. Hi, thank you, Andrew. It's working now? Okay. Thank you, Paige and Sandy, for letting me know that we're moving along. And so we were having some glitches there. Thanks, Andrew. Okay. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, and I will be sharing with you some links. So I'm going to put those into the chat box for you right now in case you haven't been able to get to that handout yet. And some opportunities and resources for you to share. There we go, into the chat box. Hopefully that will work. Is the fact sheet from OSPI, the Dyslexia Advisory Council, as well as a dyslexia brief from the National Council for Improving Literacy. We'll be talking about some strengths and struggles, and we'll be doing some simulations. And for that, there's a link to some other simulations by understood.org. Now, I will say that keep watching back for that. Some of their simulations are broken right now, but they do still have videos and information about what it feels like. It's called Through My Eyes, through your child's eyes. We'll be talking about some educational strategies. A useful resource for that is the IDA's Dyslexia in the Classroom. IDA is the International Dyslexia Association. And then when it comes to curriculum, there's a great video by National Center for Improving Literacy called Characteristics of Effective Instruction that I wanted to share with you. All right, so engagement opportunities. We have the chat. Please do chime in. Make sure you give me a thumbs up, but at least a kind of a smiley. Sometimes if you do Alt #1, you can get a little smiley in there, just so I know that you're still with me and that we're working and everything's going okay. And then we of course have the Padlet, and I'm going to put that link in again. If you can't access it, I don't know if the chat box will let you go back up to the top easily. I know in things with Zoom, thank you, Andrew, for the smileys. There's the Padlet, and you'll notice that the first option on the Padlet was background knowledge, and we see that many people have added in just a little bit of background knowledge where you are. I did create a poll, but I don't know how to access it. We didn't get a chance to test that. So let's see if I can show the results. Show polls. I don't know. We have it in the Padlet. Unless, of course, Andrew wants to help me with that. Okay. We're good. We have the background knowledge for us there, and I'll check that from time to time to get a feel for where we are. So we have the chat, we have Padlets, and if you don't, it's not easy to access the Padlet via the chat. If you prefer, you can use that QR code to access the Padlet that way too. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let's start with an introduction. And this is just where I'd love you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what brings you here. While I'm giving you a little bit about my background, just so that you understand where I come from and what drives me and what brings me to this field. So I started my career at a school called Chartwell back in California in 2001, and it was a school for kids with dyslexia. And I never thought I would be there. Thank you. Because dyslexia just wasn't a part of my world. I hadn't even really heard of it until I started at Chartwell. And it opened my eyes to the struggles that these kids experience, as well as the challenges and the benefits and what we can do to help. That when I learned to teach kids with dyslexia, I thought to myself, I wish I had learned to read and write this way. It just made it so clear and it was so logical. And that's what I want for all kids. And my journey that started out professional, I was on the board of the International Dyslexia Association, as well as Decoding Dyslexia. My journey became personal when my daughter was born, 10 years after I started at Chartwell. And in the meantime, I had learned how heritable dyslexia is, as well as the fact that it was on my both my father's side and my mother's side. So hence my journey that was professional became personal. And I've been on both sides of the IEP. I was a special educator. I was now been a parent whose daughter has been on an IEP. Now she's on a 504. We've had our own journeys. So I'd love to look through it a little bit later when you have a chance to give yourselves, please tell us who you are and what brings you here. Thank you, Donna, for letting us know you're a para-educator. We've got, someone teaching lab and resource room in Bellingham. Thank you very much for those of you who, an assistant principal. It's just useful for me to know who's in the room this way, so thank you. I'll give you a moment to type in. New literacy specialist, fantastic. Teaching and learning, awesome, Michael, glad you're here. Oakville, just around the corner. Of course, you always will have at least one student with dyslexia. We've got a music educator, wonderful. Great, thank you. So as we're going to start off with understanding dyslexia, I first want to frame and make sure we are clear when we're talking about reading. We really need two skills, and this is called what's called the simple view of reading, is understanding the words we read off the page and able to translate those words into figure out what they are. So this is the word identification piece, or the word recognition if you know it quickly and automatically. But then we have to also understand them. So that's the language comprehension. This would be if I could understand the words, if someone read it to me. So if I'm strong at both of these, if someone read this to me or they talk to me, I understand what that language is, and I'm able to get those words off the page myself, I'm a typical or a skilled reader. So that's would be something that a large majority of our kids, luckily, are in this category. But this, you can see this just kind of illustrates what the two skills that we really need to be able to do well in order to read with comprehension and fluency. We need to be able to get the words off the page and understand them once they do. Now, there are many students. The largest of the second largest category are those that we consider dyslexic, or as David Kilpatrick's used the term, a compensator. A compensator would be someone who slipped through the cracks or got by until the reading demands in third grade, fourth grade, maybe even middle school or high school were such that they couldn't keep up because their word reading was slower than their peers. And so those kids struggle with getting it off the page. But once they do, if you give them something to listen to, or if you spoke it to them and you read it aloud, their language comprehension is strong with that. They have phonological processing problems, including problems with decoding and encoding, that it's really the glitch in their word reading. On the other side, we have a comprehension deficit. This is something sometimes called hyperlexic. This would be kids very often on the autistic spectrum, not always, but very often. Sometimes it's called nonverbal learning disability. They may have weak vocabulary, morphology, syntax, discourse level processing, and comprehension strategies. So these kids can get the words off the page, but they struggle once they do. Now, I do want to have a caveat too, is that this isn't just necessarily kids themselves. This can also be dependent on the relationship between the learner or the reader and the text. So while I may be in that green category, strong language comprehension, strong word reading, you give me a text that's about engineering or even neuroscience, I'm going to slow down and I'm going to struggle because my language comprehension on that text is weaker. There may be a vocabulary I don't know. There may be syntactical structures that are very advanced. And so I'm going to struggle a little bit more with that text. So these are really dependent on the relationship between what I'm reading and my abilities. So hence, while the dyslexia is somebody who can understand it if you read it to me, they may struggle in that understanding with different kinds of language as well. And of course, you have the English language learners, which is another situation as well. Those, sometimes they may be able to pronounce it. I can pronounce words in some languages that I have no idea what I'm reading. So hence you need both that language comprehension and the word reading aspect. The mixed difficulty is the students who are weak in both. Luckily, that's our smallest category, but it is another challenge where I have to work with the students to get them to be able to identify the words, read them, and then understand what they're reading. And so that's a much larger load for the teachers and for the students, but luckily that's the smallest number in categories. Okay, thank you. I'm just checking in to see if there's anything that new's come in, and Larry's going to have to let me know if anything comes on the Q&A because I don't know if it's going to give me any kind of notification on that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to move into is the definition of dyslexia that was adopted by Washington in 2018. There are a few key things that I want to draw your attention to after I read it, but I also invite you to use the Padlet to note from the definition. You'll see the second column, any keywords or phrases that stand out to you, anything that you reflect upon as I'm reading this definition. When I'm using Zoom, I like to let people circle or highlight or star, but we don't have that option here, so you can use the Padlet to engage that way. So to start off, the definition that was adopted by here in Washington: dyslexia is a specific learning disorder that is neurological in origin and that is characterized by unexpected difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities that are not consistent with the person's intelligence, motivation, and sensory capabilities. So a few key things. Number one, the word disorder. A lot of people have asked me why disorder, why not disability or impairment, etc. And frankly, when you look at the WACs for special education, you'll find those terms pretty interchangeable. However, it has been drawn to my attention recently the importance of the word disorder instead of disability. It helps us understand that dyslexia is a spectrum that may or may not be severe enough to be considered a disability and therefore qualify for special education and the interventions that are needed in that way. So, like I said, my daughter had an IEP, now she has a 504. Some students may not need any of those at all. It is a spectrum disorder. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to draw attention to that word. The neurological in origin, there are some definitions that will say neurobiological in origin. The whole key point here is that it is in the brain, that they can see brain differences in readers in those with and without dyslexia. When we're talking about accurate or fluent word recognition, accurate has to come first. Fluency would be the automaticity that we really need. And spelling goes so hand in hand with it, as does the decoding, because that's how you get your accuracy. And then this is often seen as unexpected. So hence, this isn't consistent with your IQ, your motivation, or your ability to hear or to see. Moving on to the next sentence, these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological components of language. Those are the sounds of our words and how we speak. And this is often unexpected in relation to one's other cognitive abilities, meaning their learning is just fine. This is the glitch, the phonological glitch that gets in the way of their word reading. But it also may get in the way of their speaking and their labeling of things. For example, they may mix up bagel and donuts or up and down, or they may, my daughter used to mix up him and her drove her brother nuts. She knew it was a girl. She just was using the wrong pronouns. So those labels, that's her phonological glitch. That's what's getting in the way of that. So it's not just in what helps me in the reading and decoding, but also speaking, and sometimes left and right, and getting that confusion of labels as well. A secondary consequence that comes from these struggles could be effect of problems when reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that impedes your growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And what I mean by that is, while I really need background knowledge to understand texts, I gain so much background knowledge and that vocabulary knowledge through reading. So the more I'm struggling with my reading, the more that I'm going to struggle in that development of background knowledge and vocabulary. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. Oh, awesome. Love that. See, people are adding in things to the chat Jamboard. So thank you. Some keywords that people are adding in here. I won't pause long then for you. I'll take a moment to see if there are any questions or concerns or thoughts that you would like to put in the chat box, or I think you can unmute to contribute. I'm not sure. Thanks, Larry. All right, let's go back then and get into feeling it. This is another way of looking. We're going to get into feeling it in just a moment. At that definition that I find useful. And it's just a visual representation of what we just saw in text. Sometimes a graphic is another way of looking at it that's helpful for us. So this, although it says the 2002 definition, that's from the International Dyslexia Association. Their definition is almost exactly word for word the one here in Washington. They may use neurobiological, I can't recall. And sometimes there are two sentences where we use one or vice versa. Otherwise, it's pretty much word for word. But the intent here is that deficit in the phonological component that I mentioned, that glitch, which Marianne Wolf calls it, a glitch in your understanding of the sounds of our language, affects my ability to decode the words, to translate those letters to what their sounds, and to blend it and to figure out what those words are. Affects my ability to spell words, to do those things accurately and automatically with the appropriate rate and emotions. Those both affect, all of that affects my reading comprehension and my reading experience. My reduced reading experience affects my vocabulary and background knowledge growth, which in turn goes back and affects my comprehension. So you can see it becomes a cyclical issue here. A few key things that I want to draw our attention to, and there are a lot more of these on the fact sheets that I shared. But just to keep in mind that, like everyone, students with dyslexia have strengths and difficulties. Now, you may say, okay, the difficulties sometimes feel like they outweigh the strengths, but we have to really help our kids feel those strengths and understand that they have a lot to offer. And that's really, really important for our kids' self-esteem, for their growth, and for them to engage in the things that are difficult for them, to have the motivation to do so, is to know that they've got some really positive, amazing things as well. Now, I will have a caveat. I went to a conference once where there was a parent who wrote a book, and she said, all kids with dyslexia have strong empathy. And I kind of took a deep breath and thought, well, you probably haven't taught sixth grade boys who just discovered that they have dyslexia, have you? And, the reality is I'm always have to be careful about the word always. Is that, yes, my daughter is very empathetic and she is fantastic with her brother, but that's one child with dyslexia. So they're all going to be beautiful, unique individuals. However, commonly it seems you have seen a lot of the individuals with dyslexia with strong reasoning skills, critical thinking skills. We think of outside the box, creative thinking, strong oral skills, very good vocabularies, may not always be able to retrieve the right word. Maybe they're retrieving the wrong word, but they've got conceptually, they've got it. When we were teaching at Chartwell, we would teach about before, during, and after, and days of the week and such. And my daughter went through a time when she was struggling with yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Conceptually, she knew what she was talking about. She was just using the wrong word. And so I really worried that her teachers wouldn't understand that she knew what she was talking about tomorrow, even though she said yesterday. So it's the labeling that can sometimes get in the way. Very strong problem solving in some of these individuals. If you look at about 35% of Fortune 500 CEOs are individuals with dyslexia. Richard Branson, who just went off into space or tried, he has dyslexia, and he's talked very honestly about it. A lot of artists, a lot of actors, that's one of the things I really like to help kids see, is that there are fantastic, successful people with dyslexia. So even though you have these difficulties that you see on the right, these are some things that doesn't mean it's going to be a barrier to your success. So you'll see here the inability to sound out new words. That's really the biggest key. It's not knowing where to divide words into syllables, not knowing what sounds the words make. Our language is very complex. It is, I've just gotten a great book that is helping me see that it is extremely transparent. I've been arguing for a while it's 97% transparent, but there are things you need to know in order to understand that transparency. It's not a one-to-one sound symbol correspondence like languages like Spanish or Italian. So there's more we need to know in order to do that. And that's tricky for kids with dyslexia. That somebody, as I'll show later, a ladder of different strengths in accessing these. Somebody who is up in that green zone, remember from the boxes earlier, we may see easily these statistical regularities of our language. Kids with dyslexia don't. They need to have that explicitly taught to them to help them understand the patterns in order to sound out new words, in order to build their sight word vocabulary of words they can recognize on sight. Very often you have that listening comprehension exceeds reading comprehension. That should be a no-brainer for you after seeing that table earlier. They've got that language comprehension. It's the word reading that's difficulty. And then that last one, inadequate response to effective instruction and intervention. That's really, for them, they're going to need a lot more time with this and a lot more practice than other kids. So people often ask me, how often is this the case? Somebody put in earlier, I think on the Jamboard or in the chat box, that every year here he teaches somebody with dyslexia. Oh, yes, you do. Because the reality is it's about 1 in 5. So I wanted to start here, though, with the number of our students who are reading at or below basic level. Now, if you go to the OSPI website, it's very confusing. You'll find someplace where it says 65% is at or above basic. Another one says at or below basic. It's because I've had to go to several different sources. The reality is there are 30% at basic and 35% below basic. So that's where you get the 65%. And that's why I use this graphic to illustrate with the red books, though, there. And just to remind us that those students who are struggling below basic, that 30%, they're struggling to figure out information and to read maps and to understand so much of their world. They're struggling to make inferences, to identify details, and to interpret meanings because they're struggling to get the words off the page. Dyslexia, you'll see, as I mentioned, 1 in 5. The International Dyslexia Association and a lot of research claims that up to 20% of the population may show indications of or weaknesses associated with dyslexia, those symptoms that it shows there. But notice how I have those Ds distributed, and this was inspired by an infographic on the IDA website, that some students, or you'll notice there are three Ds below, 1 D above, that students with dyslexia are more likely to read below basic, but some may read at or above basic. So again, it's going to be a spectrum on the severity and how much they struggle with those. So I just want to take a pause for that before we get into some strengths and struggles and give you a moment to react in the chat box. Take a pause and have a thought in either the React, or I'll check on the Jamboard as well. Since I don't see anything come in, I don't think. Thank you. There are a number of reading scholars that question that 20%, correct? Yes, and Sherry, it depends on how they're defining dyslexia in their research. I've seen research probably as low as 5, 17 is one of the most common. That's why they try to broaden it and say some indicators of or weaknesses associated with dyslexia or some sort of struggle that's related. It just makes an easy advocacy point to say 1 in 5. All right, so let's get into some simulations because you're going to have some experiences of making. Do I still have Larry with me? Because I was hoping to have people reading orally, but if I can have maybe a couple of volunteers, can we do that? I'll let you work on that detail because we don't need it at the moment.
So Alicia, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So what I believe, if you would like some folks to be able to respond, they'll go up to that top and request the audio video access. Okay. And then you see where it says moderator panel in the lower, then once, I believe that this is how this works, that once they make that request, it's you that then gets to authorize that through that moderator panel.
We'll give it a try. First of all, we have one that doesn't require a reading. So we are going to do a visual perception. We'll do a reading and do a writing. Now, I will say that these are just a taste. I have many more simulations so that people can really experience so much of the stress that our kids go through. But with this platform, we're going to try and do at least these 3. So the first one, I want to start with the visual perception. I like to use because I feel like it does a good job of combating the myth that dyslexia is in the eyes. Because the first question I want to make sure, please put in the chat box whether or not you can see this image. Don't put what it is an image of. This is a photograph. It's a very bad and grainy photograph. And if you've seen the movie Fat City by Rick Lavoie, again, please don't give away what this is. But I just want to make sure you can see this. So if you cannot see this, please say, I can't see it in the chat box so we can make sure that everyone can see this. Donna, that means you can see it, I think. So I'm just going to kind of give everyone a moment. Now my next question, thank you, Heidi, is what is it a picture of? Oh, Roxanne Cox is with us. I think she's done this before. Let's see. So, somebody who's never seen this before, put in the chat box, what is a picture of? Be brave. I love it, Sandy. That's a new one for me. I don't think I've had anyone say that. Surface of the moon. Somebody who's never seen it before. Any other guesses on what that is? A brain scan. That's also a new one. Notice me stepping back to get a good view of that. Desert landscape, blueberry cobbler. I love it, Deborah. Now, if you do not see what it actually is, you're in good company. I've done this with a room full of 50 people, even hundreds. And we'll get a handful. And in 50 people, there's usually one. And I'm still not seeing it. Larry, can you see what it is? Have you seen this before? Do you know what it is, Larry?
No, I do not.
You didn't know you were going to get called on today, did you?
I
did. All right, so I'm going to give you all some direct instruction that is, I'm not going to change this image, but I'm going to tell you what it is. And for many of you, that's going to be enough. You may need to step back to see it well. Now, if it's not, I'm going to give you an outline of it to see you. So, because I still haven't seen anybody put it in there, this is a cow. Do you see the cow, Larry? Let's see if I can get my little, let's see, laser pointer. Here we go. Here's the nose. Here's the one nostril. Here's the next nostril. The angle of the nose here. Here's one eye. Here's the other eye. Here's the ear, the top of the head, the other ear. Andrea's got it. She sees that cow. Paige sees it. Do you see it, Larry? Do you see the cow now? Yeah. Now, for some people, if you haven't been able to see it yet, it does help if I give you an outline. Now you see the cow. Actually, that I didn't do that outline. It's a little bit off, but let's try going back there. Now do you see the cow? So much more fun to do it in person when you hear everyone go, oh! Now, I didn't change this image, but what I did is I attuned your brain to that, what it is. And that's exactly what we're doing as we're teaching reading. Is that initially, these are just random squiggles. And I see that I learned that this represents the V sound, and this represents I. And this SU is a j, visual. And that, now I look at it, and I just know it's visual. Because I've gotten practice making this link between that sound and the symbol and then linking them together. So just like you now see this cow, and you can't unsee the cow. Like, I cannot unsee it. I even step back and I'm like, I cannot see anything but the cow, because that's all I know. It's how my brain makes sense of this image, which is how our brains make sense of writing. And our brains do make sense of writing very, very quickly. There's a great resource. If you put in Stroop test, I didn't put your link on it, but I love going to the Stroop test. And it shows pictures of, for example, animals or colors. I think even directions. But the animals are a fun one because it'll have a picture of a giraffe with the word cat on it. And you're expected to say giraffe, not cat. And it's hard to do because our brains are so attuned to those words because that's what we're accustomed to. Okay, so let's go to the reading one, and hopefully we can get a couple of volunteers to read for us. Now, I have had some people say and ask, is this what it looks like for all kids? No, not necessarily. Oh, Larry, you went off. I was going to call on you if I don't get anybody else. But this is a way of making it difficult for you. It looks like things didn't get exactly lined over like I had hoped, but we had some glitches. Okay, let's see if we have a volunteer to do some reading for us. Nonetheless, give it a try on your own. Read it aloud, even if you're not going to read it out loud with us. Read this aloud to yourself. You should be by yourselves, possibly. And Larry, can I get you to volunteer? I was hoping to be able to get at least one or two people.
Let me try to bring it up to a larger scale. I have it real small screen. So
okay.
Hang on a sec.
Yeah, the system might not be the
Come
easiest.
on, said Betty. We have to...
Careful, what's her name? See, there's an S there.
Okay. So, Betsy.
There you go.
We have to...
Careful. Now remember, sometimes that BDPQ can be tricky, can't it, Larry? You are here
to pick
up
this
uh-huh.
Corn?
Yes.
I'm going to stop there.
Is there anybody else who would like to give it a try with us? This again comes from Fat City by Rick Lavoie. I don't see any volunteers.
And just to share once again, in order to volunteer, at the top of the screen, you should have a link that is giving you an option of turning on your audio and video. And so you could do that just temporarily to be able to contribute, and then you can leave that arrangement or leave that situation so that you're back into the participant group without screen on or audio.
I'll give everyone a moment at least to try on your own. And then we'll talk about what makes it. I'll read it to you in case you wanted to see what it would sound like. course, it will. I've done this so many times, it won't have the same effect because I can read this and know very well what it says, but I'll go ahead and read it for your confirmation of what you were reading on your own. We don't have another can of popcorn. Are we going to eat popcorn that's been on the floor? Asked Susan. We can wash it, Betsy answered. I always tell people, be careful with that one. Because of this one here. That's a good idea, said Susan. We can wash it. Come on, all of you. Help us pick it up. So I noticed that, and this was from a 3rd grade reading. Now I noticed some of you were already putting some comments into what makes reading difficult. I wanted to share with you the words from students themselves. These came from students in the Portland, Oregon, not just Portland, from all over Oregon. There is a group from the International Dyslexia Association in Oregon, in Portland area, and Southern Washington, that has it's called their Student Empowerment Panel. And they are students who are mostly middle school, high school, some elementary, some college, who support each other and work together and teach each other self-advocacy skills. And one of the things they do are simulations like these. So these are their words of what makes things difficult for you. And so one of the things I like to do is to just ask, are there any of these that you really identify with? Now, you didn't have to perform and read these. Thank you, Larry, for rating them for us. But you can see some of the decoding, those unfamiliar letter patterns. If following along as others were reading, processing what other people are reading, understanding, remembering what's being read. And for many, it was fear of being called on. When I do this in person, I don't give people a choice. So let's see, people are talking about moving on the page. As you can see some of that flowing, making use of written symbols. Feel free to add in your own thoughts as well. And we're going to be doing a note-taking in just a moment. Love some of the things that have come in already. So for the note-taking exercise, hopefully you will all be following along, even though I can't hear you and see you and check on you. You do need to have a pencil and a piece of paper. Now, when I do this in person, I like to bring little tiny golf pencils to make it even more difficult for you. But nonetheless, I'm going to trust you. And I also like to say, okay, everybody, take your pencil that you normally, your hand that you normally write with, and put that writing utensil in the other hand, because that's where it's going for this exercise. You're going to copy down the text on the next slide. You're going to use that non-dominant hand to write, and you should be able to copy this down in about 2 minutes. All right, everybody ready? See if I need to give everyone in a moment to get something, an actual pencil. You can't, no typing on this one. All right, so here is your text. And this is our do now from our today. And Larry, if you don't mind coming back with us, I have a few questions for you as people are going to be doing their writing. There we go, Larry, thank you. So I just wanted to check and make sure that, for example, just want to touch bases with you and see if we've gotten permission slips for everybody for next week's field trip, or if you need to talk to Diana or Javon after school, or even maybe Shannon or Joshua. Is there anything you needed to talk to anybody about after the session's over?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we've gotten, Susan's got her stuff then involved. And I want to make sure that Billy talks to her mom too. That after class, I know that for example, Julie's mom wants her to ride the bus after school instead of walk. So we'll maybe check in with her on that.
I got it. So if there's anything else that you need from me, just let me know and I can make contact with some of those folks.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, you should be about halfway through this. I don't see anybody hollering at me in the chat box yet, so I'll give you a couple more minutes. No, not a couple more minutes. You should only take about another half minute on that. All right, so you should be done. I'll go ahead and move on. And we'll have a chat about what makes that difficult, so that writing. Does anybody in here speak Welsh? Because that's what that was. and so hence I wanted to give you, Karen says, nope, no Welsh. You had to do some letter for letter transcription, didn't you, on that? Because there was nothing familiar on that last. You couldn't take a whole word and just translate it to, thank you, Andrea, for your honest ugh. You couldn't translate that easily. You had to go letter for letter. And so this is what, thanks, Beth, for that honesty too. It's frustrating, isn't it? And I had some, I was trying to distract you orally. That's why I asked Larry to join in with me on that. You had that limited amount of time that could contribute to that stress, huh? The physical act of handwriting, reading from a screen, maybe you have it tiny on that. Difficulties with spelling, because those language patterns were unfamiliar. Let's see if anything else came into our Padlet. Anything else that you want to add? Spelling is difficult, yes. Listening, visual, reading. Sometimes it's extremely overwhelming. Thank you for those in pieces. And receiving the knowledge auditorily. So I love what made it difficult for you. That's why I'd like to try and give you a pause every now and then. Can't type while listening. Hearing my name in the middle of the reading. Yes, that was the idea, is to throw you off. Definitely, that was Welsh. Karen's asking, is there an association with the fine motor skills? Definitely. Is that why we were writing with our non-dominant hand? It's also a connection between, well, one, I had to make it harder for you. So there may be and there may not be a fine motor. It's more of an orthographic motor. So it's called orthomotor, if I remember correctly. Orthographic, there's the fine motor, the gross motor, and there was an orthographic. It's not at the top of my head at the moment. But yes, it's very common that students with dyslexia also have what's called dysgraphia. But nonetheless, it's also, you had to remember, so there's some phonological memory going on there by looking at these words that completely didn't make sense to you, and then remember those letters and to be able to put those down. So there were a lot of things that were going on in that, not just the motor association, but the memory, and it's definitely, dyslexia affects writing in many ways and not just the reading. So thank you, Karen, for that. I do want to share a poem from one of the students from the dyslexia advocacy panel. And I usually like to ask volunteers to read these. I think it's more powerful when it's someone other than myself. I love Karen. Yes, it's definitely. Thanks, Paige. So do I have a volunteer to read this for us? Or Larry, would you like to come back? Since you know how. I'm not sure I would be able to come in and out if I were a participant.
Well, let's see if we can coax someone from the group. I think that would be...
All right, yes. Bev. Let's see, how do I... Thank you. Did I do it? I clicked the positive. There comes Beth. All right, thank you.
So just start reading this one?
Yes, please.
Bridget's story, You Are Not Alone. To my people who've been told that they weren't smart, who struggled to form letters into words, express themselves on a page, those kept in from recess, cubbies and folders of unfinished packet work, endless worksheets, you are not alone. To the teachers who've patronized, your actions have more power than you think. When you underestimate us, we devalue ourselves. Question our intelligence, quiet our voices. You've made us hurt. To the people who have advocated for the 1 in 5 and the 2E, who saw strength instead of weakness, who provided the tools to succeed, for those who can relate, we see you.
Thank you, Beth. There is one more page if you're willing.
Okay.
Two more stanzas with a picture of Bridget herself.
To my people who have 504 by their attendance picture, who test in the library, who work twice as hard, who are an advocate for themselves, for those that are determined, you are not alone. Let a new generation be educated, depart from tradition, think differently, inspire us through creativity, thinking outside the box, engage our minds, teach us, and learn from us.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate having another voice. I'm going to give us just a moment to reflect. Would be a time when I would normally put people into small groups and have a chance to verbally talk, but I'm just going to give you a moment to do some reflection. I'm going to stop talking and think about what was difficult of these simulations, what made it difficult for you. You'll see a column on the Padlet for this, and what connections have you made to students you know. And then hopefully we can either Beth can rejoin us if she'd like, or someone else can orally share, or you can put something into the chat box, and I'll look through the Padlet as it comes in as well too. Thanks, Paige, for your sharing. It's important to see those real stories and the individual messages. There are so many really great videos of kids sharing their stories. And frankly, when I was a teacher, it's also the parents sharing their stories. I remember a parent saying to me once, you know, when my kid falls and skins his knees, I can put a Band-Aid on it. But when he says, Mom, why am I so stupid? It gets you here. It really does. So I'm going to pause for a moment and let you have your reflection time and writing time. Thank you, Sherry. Yes. I really like that her words. That's why I like to share it. Thank you, Beth, for being our reader. I'll leave this. You can come back to it. And I think you can also add on comments to other people's as well. Whoever's typing, I totally understand. Number one, they need you to understand that they are trying as hard as they can. And then number two, that's the first thing. Then we can help them with their struggles. So thank you. So that's what you came here for, is some educational strategies. These circles are from the International Dyslexia Association, and they are also what Louisa Moats recommends in her letters training, which I've been reviewing. They are what Jan Hasbrook recommends in her newest book, Conquering Dyslexia. It's what Sally Shaywitz talks about in her books, Overcoming Dyslexia. But it's really understanding and making clear how our language works. So I'm going to take out of the chat box, put into the chat box a link. Thank you, Roxanne. Oops, I didn't start typing. Link, there we go. The link that I'm giving you is more about structured literacy. And I'm just kind of looking at your comments too as we go. And so what they're recommending is that our kids understand how our language works. Because I like to make an analogy, like kids with autism can learn social cues, and they can learn social situations and emotions and reading faces, but they need to be explicitly taught. It's not going to come naturally for them. The same thing with kids with dyslexia and the sound symbol correspondences and how our language works. They can learn that, but they don't pick it up automatically like some kids do. They need to be explicitly taught. So that's what you're seeing here in the pieces that we need to make sure they understand. They need to understand the sounds of our language. That when I say jeet yet, I'm not going to write it. I'm not going to ever read jeet yet. I'm going to read or write, did you eat yet? So the oral language is not an exact replica of written language unless somebody actually writes, I like butter on, or unless somebody says, I like butter on my toast. Let's just say, I like butter. So we have to understand the sounds of our language, how those are represented in print in the individual sound symbol correspondences. We have to think about how words are broken apart into syllables and then how those are again represented in print. I have to understand morphemes, which are the smallest unit of meaning in a language. So I have to understand how adding an S changes something from singular to plural, or how adding an IVE or an ION makes it from vacate to vacation. So all these suffixes and prefixes and how they change words, my understanding, that's going to really build my vocabulary, my knowledge of semantics and the meanings of words and phrases and larger units. And then the syntax is how they're organized, in what order. And so now this is really essential for English language learners, but it's essential for our kids with dyslexia and many of our other kids with learning disabilities to understand that there is a logic behind our language. And that's one of the things that I think too few teachers really understand the logic. And I think that's one of the things that really drives me. What I do is I want to make sure that all teachers understand these elements. They know our language, because you can't teach what you don't know, right? And then next, this is the how. So this is the what in the first circle. The second circle is the how. We need to do this in a way that's explicit. Again, some of these kids are not going to pick this up automatically. They need it to be explicit. We need to do it in a way that's diagnostic. In other words, I'm finding out where their holes are and what I need to plug. And we need to do it systematically, going from easier to harder, more concrete to more abstract. And then we need to do it cumulatively, so we're constantly getting that practice. Heidi, I do see your question about letters trainings. I've been going through it, and it's pretty much what I do. I'm thrilled to see such alignment. I haven't finished yet, but most of my trainings are based on Louisa Moats's book, Speech to Print. I'm looking around for a copy of it. That's why you see me looking off. But her Speech to Print is based on, this is based on and aligned with, she has a whole chapter on phonology, sound symbol correspondences, syllables. She has, and a whole chapter on orthography and all of these pieces. And the letters trainings are made by Louisa Moats. And so these are completely aligned. So let's look into a little bit of explicit. The book recommendation. The book is, hold on. It's right here. No. Yes. Okay, sorry. I should have had it with me. The book that I was recommending is called Speech to Print. And it is, Shannon asks if it's the same of letters. So this is just a book, whereas the letters goes through and it's really thorough and it's very simple. It's almost the same content that I'm able to tell at this point as I'm reviewing it. It seems to be the same content, but this is on your own, and that has videos and exercises and examples of it in action in classes, which I really like. Whereas this is just a book, and it has exercises and the answers to the exercises, and it's a fantastic book. But it's great to go through this with someone. That's why I really like to either have a study group with it, but this is one of my go-tos, and it has been for years. Yes, the letters that Heidi mentioned, it's actually written LETRS, Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. All right, so when we're going to be talking about this explicit piece, though, I'm going to step a little bit more into that, because this is really the piece that I think too few people spend a lot of time on, is really understanding what we mean by explicit. And I'm going to put in the link to NCIL, the National Center for Improving Literacy's site and information on Ask an Expert, what are the characteristics of effective literacy instruction? And like I said, all these links are in the document that was attached into the description of this session. So you'll notice, as if you think about little Anita Archer's I do, we do, you do, and maybe some of these kids need a lot more that we do and lots of you do, and maybe go back to we do. That's where you have the teacher explanation, the teacher modeling, some kind of signal so they know to respond, lots of routines to help kids stay with us, lots of opportunity to respond so they are getting feedback. That's the immediate error correction. People often ask me, should I just let them read it and then respond? No, because the reality is practice makes permanent. So we need to be making sure that they're practicing it the right way, instead of what we call in the ESOL world, we had talked about fossilization. If I'm practicing something incorrectly, it's going to get fossilized, and that's the way I think it is, and it's going to be very hard for me to change that habit. So I want to make sure we're correcting errors as quickly as possible, so we are helping our students understand the right way and making sure they get it. Because in sound symbol correspondence, there pretty much is a right way and a wrong way. I mean, at least how we would pronounce things in our culture and in our society. If I went to another area of the country, they may pronounce things differently, but at least that kids understand that there is some variability there. If I'm going to say egg or egg, or how I pronounce some particularly vowels will change, or car and car. You know, I have a friend in Boston right now. Karen asks, how does letters compared with LLI? LLI is a program. I think you mean LLI. Oh, remind me. Isn't that the Fountas and Pinnell, I believe? Letters is a teacher training program to develop teacher training knowledge. It is not a program for kids. And that's what I do as well, is I provide knowledge for the teachers. I want to, as I know that there were some curriculum providers who like to say that they wanted teacher-proof curricula. I want curricula-proof teachers that can understand the positives and negatives and know what they're doing, what they're looking at when they look at a curricula. And so, and that's, I know Louisa Moats' advocacy as well. So letters is teacher knowledge. It's not a curricula for kids. But another piece with this, when we're talking about explicit instruction, is the evidence base. And this is, I'm going to bring up another book here, which I think is on the shelf there. David Kilpatrick's a fantastic place to start if you really, really want to know the nitty-gritties of reading, overcoming, assessing, preventing reading difficulties. David Kilpatrick's book, I'll put it in our chat box for you. It's called Essentials of Reading, Assessing. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to another source in this one I give you here, our document. There's a Padlet of educational resources, which has a lot of stuff here. And I'll show you the books. And these are from the classes I teach. And so there's a book recommendations. And this would just be the easier way. There's the speech to print. And I've mentioned Conquering Dyslexia earlier. Here's the Essentials book I'm just mentioning right now. See if I can put that into the chat box for you. Let's see. I'll pull it up this way for you. And it's just really good knowledge on how we can look at assessing, preventing, overcoming reading difficulties. And so what David Kilpatrick did is he looked at decades and decades of research and found really you cannot narrow it down to 3 things that we need to do for all of our kindergartners, first graders, and second graders to prevent reading difficulties. And these are the same things I've heard Jack Fletcher say, Louisa Moats, etc. This is the same thing you get again and again from multiple sources of research. And that is that we need to be making sure that we are instructing our kids in understanding phonological awareness, how the sounds of our language work. We need to systematically and explicitly instruct in the connection between those sounds and the letter or letters that represent them. So that's why I'm using the word grapheme instead of letters, because we have 26 letters, we have 44 sounds. So hence a grapheme could be a single letter, or it could be multiple letters like the IGH representing I or the EIGH representing E. So that's why we call it a grapheme, because it could be more than one letter. And lots of practice reading connected text. There is research that is really showing too that when I'm saying connected text, very often we're meaning decodable texts. So they're getting practice of what they're learning. There is a place for leveled readers, for texts that are more natural, and that helps kids see how often this pattern occurs in natural text. But let's get them strong and comfortable with that pattern first. And so that's where we're really making sure that they get a grounding in understanding how those patterns work. So this is the preventative, tiers 1 and tier 2. When we get into those kids who are older or who are struggling in tiers 2 and 3, remedial, we again have 3 essential elements, and you'll notice they're almost exactly the same. Phonological awareness, but now instead of building those skills, we are eliminating deficits. Phonemic awareness, again, we're taking it not just from the broader umbrella of being able to tell you how many words are in jeet yet, did you eat yet, but how many sounds are in the word split. And if I took the p out of split, I have slit. And if I change the r to ol in crash, it becomes clash. So being able to really play with sounds at those levels, because it's going to help their memory for this connections between sounds and symbols. The next one is those phonic skills, those sounds to symbols, really making sure that that is strong. And the phonic decoding is putting those symbols, translating those symbols to the sounds and putting them together to make words. So here I would sound out this word as ol, and putting it together. And then for spelling, I'm going to help my kids understand that at the end of a single syllable word, and if I have an FLS or Z, it's going to be doubled. It's just a convention in our language. So helping my kids understand those concepts for both reading and spelling. And then you'll see lots of opportunities for reading connected text. So I just like that these all really support the quote from David Kilpatrick there, is that research has shown that students with even the most severe reading disabilities can improve their word reading skills. I'm going to give you another moment to pause and reflect and respond, and I'm just in soon, but I have another piece to remind us. And this was cited in David Kilpatrick, but it's from Foreman and Torgerson, one of their many research studies, is that those components of effective reading instruction are the same, whether the focus is prevention or intervention. Phonemic awareness, my understanding of the sounds of language. Phonemic decoding skills, translating those sounds, the letters to sounds and blending them together to make words. Fluency in word recognition and processing, so how quickly I can identify those words, and accurately, then quickly and automatically. Making meaning of those and understanding it. My understanding words, and when I say vocabulary, I mean in multiple uses, and understanding that even with a first grader, that bat has many meanings, or ran or run. I have a run in my stocking. I'm gonna run to the store. I'm gonna run on, and it's a run-on sentence. There are many different meanings, and context is crucial for me to understand which meaning I'm talking about in this setting. Spelling, of course, because that's the connection between the sounds and the symbols. Spelling, reading, and writing are two sides of the same coin. They really support each other in our development of them. And lastly, is writing. So I'm going to pause for a moment and give you a chance to reflect, respond, to put something into the chat box or into the Padlet, to give you a chance to think about these preventative and remediative recommendations. Do they explicitly teach what students with dyslexia need, based on what we've been talking about so far on students' strengths? And do you feel like your programs follow these recommendations? So just give you a moment to reflect and think about those recommendations. I think that second question is actually a repeat from the first one. I'll give a pause for reflection. Any thoughts or connections so far with those big three that I mentioned twice? In two different ways. Julie, we were just talking about, I'll go back to the two, not this one, sorry, let me just jump it back. The question was, any thoughts on these three? Is this something that is new, or reaffirming? Just giving you a moment to kind of reflect on those three and these three, you'll notice they're kind of the same thing: phonological awareness, phonics, and reading connected text. Definitely. Somebody put careful and accurate assessment. That's key for the diagnostic piece. The sequencing, definitely. I love whoever's putting that on. It's the collective efforts. We all need to be working together to support our students. And I think that is definitely essential. That's one of the things I appreciate about our law not being a special ed thing. It's about general ed. It's about all of us working together. It's about MTSS and really identifying what our kids need as quickly as possible and giving them let's not wait for them to need or qualify for special education. Let's get them what they need right away. Yes, the data tracking. Thank you, definitely. So that, I mean, frankly, I've had parents say to me, my first grade kid is in tears. And my own daughter, first grade was too hard. She was crying and not wanting to go to school and having headaches and stomach aches because the instruction wasn't matching her needs. And that's where we need to help her see she can do this. And she can now. She's going into 5th grade and she's doing fantastically. But as Julie said, in supplemental materials, we need that background. Yes, sometimes aiding in supplemental materials, we need to give our kids experiences and videos and other means to develop that background knowledge at the same time that we're building their abilities to read independently. So thank you. I'll come back to read whenever this person's come finishing. And I'll give one more moment if there's anybody else who has a thought to share. Thank you, Karen. I will definitely pull that up. Is a why don't students like school? So I mentioned earlier different students' needs. And this is one thing that I want to draw everyone's attention to, is Nancy Young's model or infographic about what she calls the ladder of reading. Oh, I thought that was going to be clickable. My apologies, it wasn't. So what I will do is get that for you another way. But this graphic I find very useful to help us see that while we may all go through the same process to get to becoming a good, strong reader, we may need different amounts of support to get there. And so I was, for example, up here in 5 to 10%. It was pretty easy for me. I remember recognizing the word "the" as people. Thank you, Karen, for adding that in. I remember noticing the word "the" because it was the one I heard the most often, and it was the one I saw the most often. So I made that link. And I said to my parents, I said, is that the word "the"? Because I'd made that statistical connection of that frequency. So I was up here, and this came to me very easily. But there are others who need a lot more instruction. I remember teaching a 6th grader who was in this orange zone. She had been in special education for I don't know how long. And once I taught her explicitly the sound symbol correspondences, the syllable types, the how to divide words into syllables, she came to me one day and she said, okay, I've got this. And she did. She didn't need to be in special education. She just needed this explicit instruction, which she hadn't gotten before. And I've had many teachers say, well, I'm sure she got it, she just didn't learn it. Okay, my question to you, how many syllable types are there? Unless I've already given it away. You can put it into the chat box for us. Do you know the syllable types. Okay, there's someone here OG trained, so I know you know. But others. Susan's got it. I question though, how common is that? Unfortunately, we don't all know. It's not something that if we're a strong reader, we think about. I don't think about how to divide this word into ladder. I don't need to. But when I was teaching at Chartwell, my students definitely needed to. They needed to, for me to help them understand that this is going to be a short A sound because it had two Ds. And this is going to be the ER is going to make the sound. They needed that explicit instruction because they didn't pick it up automatically. They didn't see those statistical regularities on their own to see that this REA could be read or it could be read. But in this case, because it has the ing, it's going to be reading, because reading doesn't make sense. So those are pieces that we need to give them explicit and systematically so that they can get it. And you can see the redder it is down here, the more repetitions and the more explicit and systematic and sequential it's going to need to be. All right, Shannon's got our clovers. Awesome. That's what they are. Closed consonant LE, open vowel team, E for vowel consonant, the silent E at the end, the vowel consonant E, and the R for R controlled. I have a colleague who uses Clover. I like those as well. I think it was, there's another program, I think it was really great reading, used Velcro as another acronym for the 6 syllable types. So thanks for contributing and joining in, for those of you who did. Let's see, moving on. This is another infographic that I found recently that, whoops, as soon as I can move to it, here we go. It came from a Twitter post, but I feel like it was a really nice way of just helping us and reminding us of the instruction kids with dyslexia need. And notice, minimize distractions. You guys didn't like all those distractions I was doing and giving you while you were writing, were you? Because if they're working so hard to decode, it can be hard even harder if there are noises and announcements and construction going on outside or whatever it means. So hence, if it helps them to put some headphones on so they can focus and block on all that, that could be really useful. Active testing or recall, the more you can get them moving and engaged instead of sitting for a long period of time. Sometimes I go into a classroom and I'm like, do you realize those first graders have been sitting for 45 minutes? I can't even do that. Notice I'm standing. You know, that we need to get movement in some way. Let's even just stand up and sit down or write in the air or get me some kind of active engagement to engage my brain. Notice we've got quizzes. A lot of people say, really, quizzes? Well, yeah. I'm trying to force an active recall. I want to, as Paige mentions, brain breaks. I also want to bring that to your attention. This is important. Let's draw it. Let's remember it. Let's refresh it. Let's write it down. Let's give you a moment to reflect and respond and write it somewhere. That's spreading out learning. If you give it to me all at once, I'm going to forget it. I need to have a little bit here, and a little bit here, and a little bit here, and a little bit here. Not me as much as my daughter does, but this is one of the pieces that's really important in all learning, but especially for our kids with dyslexia. And then lastly, those mix things up. Our brains crave variety. So while routine is essential, I go through this routine for this lesson. It gives me that stability and that consistency. After that's over, give me something new. So give me a little bit of this and a little bit of that so that my brain is engaged with this. I love how Paige says those brain breaks, exactly. This, I already mentioned your IDA's dyslexia in the classroom, but I'll put it into the chat box again for you. Okay. Now let's look at a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about curricular alignment. So I put here what I often see as, like, for example, pyramidal, the National Reading Panel's findings. So we're going to be talking about the National Reading Panel's Big Five, but we're also going to be talking about the simple view of reading a bit more, as well as stages of reading, because I want us to understand that the National Reading Panel's findings are often presented as either hierarchical, like you see here, or individual things that are all different. But the reality is, it's very complex, their interactions with each other. And this is one of the things that I want us to realize is that, yes, my phonological awareness is necessary. It builds my phonic knowledge, but my vocabulary, I need to be bringing along all the time because it helps me identify individual words. So my reading fluency is actually built upon these two, but also dependent on my vocabulary, because I'm not going to be able to remember that word quickly and easily if I don't know it. I may be able to sound it out, but its meaning, that's the hook to that string of letters that so I can remember it. If I gave you a string of letters that are completely random, you're going to have a harder time remembering it than if I gave you acronyms that you have meaning for, like the IRS and NHL and FL and things like that. So the ones that have meaning you remember more easily. So hence the vocabulary is really tied in here, as is this. These are not independent. This is really the outcome of my ability to, my phonic knowledge and then my experience with it becomes my reading fluency. And then the comprehension is an outcome as well, but it's also dependent on my vocabulary and my reading fluency. So while in a sense these are hierarchical, they're at the same time influence each other in more complicated ways. I want to share with you a graphic that comes from OSPI, and that Era, the English Language Arts Director, and I worked on together. And this was placing those National Reading Panel 5 on the framework of oral language skills. And so this can be found on the OSPI's website, the ELA website. So I'm putting this into the chat box for you as well. And if you go down to the bottom of that, you'll see what this is on their language learning standards and best practices. And down at the bottom, there's a little plus where it talks about science of reading. And this isn't on there yet, but there are some resources to learn more about structured language, structured literacy, science of reading. And the reason why we put those 5 elements on the framework of oral language skills is because that's where we begin. And that's where really all the others are standing, and we require strong oral language skills in order to do all the other 5. So my phonemic awareness, my ability to understand the sounds of my language, that obviously is connected to the oral language, but so is my phonics, because again, remember I said I can remember it better if I have meaning to it, as is the fluency, and you can see the vocabulary and the comprehension. So I'm always wanting to build kids' oral language skills and draw upon their oral language skills. So those are the 2. That's why I have it down at the base. It's that foundation on which all the others rest. So now I'm going to get into the simple view of reading, which, as you remember from our table earlier, we had language comprehension on one side along the top, and we had word reading along the side. Now, what I want to emphasize though, is that the simple view of reading posits that this is a multiplication problem. I'm going to give you a great brief on this from the National Center for Improving Literacy. And the reason why this is a multiplication problem and not additive is that if either one of these is 0, your outcome is 0. So this, keep in mind, if you could just get those words off the page, but you had no idea what they meant, there would be no reading comprehension of that. And if I just could understand stuff, but I couldn't get it off the page, again, my word reading comprehension would be nil on that. I need to have both in order to be strong there. And so this is the meaning, this is the code. And another way of looking at it is to look at this reading rope. This comes from the International Dyslexia Association. And you can see that I have the color coding. I'm going to pause for a moment. I should go get a lozenge. And let you take a look at that. And I hope you can see it all right. And what I can do actually is get the link for you to see this on your own too. So let's take a look at those complexities. What goes into language comprehension and what goes into word reading? That while I find it useful to show the complexity, I do wish that these bottom strands were not seen as independent entities. Because as I mentioned before, that phonological awareness is so key to build my decoding skills. And those are so key to be able to recognize words by sight, is I have to be able to decode it first. I need to get accurate before I can get automatic. But these skills, once they are braided together, you can see they're becoming increasingly automatic as I move toward my skilled reading. The fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. And these language comprehension strands become increasingly strategic. As I get older, I think more about language structures becoming more complicated and using positives and using infinitives and gerunds and things that little kids don't necessarily get a lot in their reading. Maybe they're listening if you're reading very advanced or higher word books to them, then they're able to read on their own. But so much of this builds through, again, our oral language. Hi, Susan. Did you have something you wanted to question or comment or thought? All right, then. Another thing I want to illustrate, though, is if you remember that simple view of reading, and remember I mentioned earlier that this is the relationship between the child and the text. Notice this little boy who's got strong language comprehension, strong word reading, as a result has strong reading comprehension, and he's reading a text that he understands those words. Oh. Sherry, I agree. It is not simple. It is very complex. Like Scarborough's rope. A little bit better, but you're right. So I'm going to give this same little kid, though, a different text. Notice this one says XYZ. And remember I mentioned earlier, it's like if you gave me a text, he's got strong word reading abilities, but his language comprehension is weak with this text. So he's going to have weak reading comprehension as a result. I take another child who may be strong in language comprehension, but weak at getting the words off the page. This is my dyslexic learner. So she's going to struggle with getting that reading comprehension unless I give her a book on tape and give her notice because she's listening to it as she's reading aloud now. So now she's going to have stronger reading comprehension. And so that's one of the advantages of so many programs like Reading for the Blind and Dyslexic, which I think is now called Learning Ally, or Bookshare, or things, or even just having a text to speech so that you can hear the text and not just have to rely on your eyes. And that's so crucial for some of our kids, so that they can be getting that word reading as they're building their word reading skills. This is another way of looking at it across time. That emergent readers come to school with knowing a few words perhaps by sight, or that they could sound out, that they could read on their own. But their language comprehension, at least if they're native English speaking, is much stronger. And as they grow, you notice that red bar keeps getting bigger. That becomes your upper limit on your reading achievement. Even after, once my word reading skills are very strong, and once I've remediated those word reading skills in poor readers, my language comprehension is going to be my upper limit. That I need to always be building that as well. And so you can see, as from an emergent reader to an independent reader, I'm gaining in both of these. So while this is much stronger in the beginning, I want to build them, always be building this one and building this up to an equal level. This is another way of looking at that simple view of reading, but mapping on the 6 skills. This again comes from the OSPI. Those are the OSPI colors. And you can see the oral language comprehension. Here's our simple view across the top, connected into those National Reading Panel 5. So the oral language and the vocabulary connected into our language comprehension, our phonemic awareness and phonics really building to our decoding, and our fluency and comprehension building into our reading comprehension. Notice, though, how we kept adding arrows. It becomes a reciprocal relationship. As who was it, Sandy or Sherry put in, it is not simple. It's very complex. It starts out simply thinking, okay, this isn't so bad, but the reality is that the skills are very reciprocal. And they progress in a hierarchical way. So when my kids come to school, they are often in what's called, or they're usually in this logographic. Perhaps they come in school knowing a few words, but they don't really know how to read them. They see the O's in the word look, and it cues them to say look because the O's remind them of eyes. And this little brain is showing me what kind of level of phonemic awareness they're thinking. They're able to break words apart into syllables and play with those and clap them, but they're not yet able to pull off an individual sound from a word like this little girl can. So at that second stage, which we also call partial alphabetic, she's able to start thinking about sounds and symbols and put them together. And so you'll notice that she sees this word and she reads it as set. She got that first one, she got that last one, she got the middle one. That's great. But she's not yet noticing every single letter and sound in that like he is able to do. So he's able to think about individual phonemes. For him, decoding is sequentially, goes step by step. He looks at the same word and he reads spent. And he's able to sound them out and put them together. He's able to think about phonemes in those individual letters, not just that pulling off the first sound, but thinking about all of the sounds and recognizing that the word slip is made up of s, o, I, p, or fix, f, I, k, s. And you can pull them apart on this, f, I, k, s, and notice those four sounds and fix. We're not going to ask them to spell that for quite some time because that one letter making two sounds is very complicated. But he's able to start reading and thinking about those different sounds with that. And then lastly, my last learner up at the top, she's able to use chunks to decode. So she can look at this word and sound it out into the syllables if she needs to, breaking it into carpenter and then putting back together into carpenter. She can manipulate phonemes and think about the difference between clash and crash and how it's changed by just one phoneme. And how she could take the O out of slip and make it into sip. So she's been able to benefit from independent reading. One of the things that I've liked about using this is I think it's helpful for teachers to realize that that my girl at the top at number 4, she can pick up a book and learn from and do what's called self-teaching through these books because she understands the sound symbol correspondences. The other kids are still learning those sound symbol correspondences, and they're going to trip up on some of those. And so if I give them a whole word, they're not necessarily knowing what to do with it yet. He's going to sound it out. He can get there, but he's going to be much more laborious than she is because she can look at chunks instead of individual sounds and letters. So I just want teachers to understand this process that all kids go through. My kids with dyslexia very often will get stuck here or even here especially, because they might see that same word and have to sound it out again and again and again. And they're going to need a lot of work to get here where they can look at it and recognize it on sight. So these are two very common places for our kids to get stuck. Either being able to recognize and understand each sound has a connection to a symbol, or when they do so, they just don't do it automatically and consistently. Okay. We need to do another pause and reflect and think about your own district's reading programs. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to reflect upon these elements that kids with dyslexia need. It's that explicitness that's really key here, and on recognizing where they are in their stages. Are we getting some decodables for them to practice? Are they getting enough practice? Are they getting that feedback? Are they getting enough explicitness so that they don't have to figure it out on their own? So those are my real major questions for you. And I'm going to pause and give you some time to put something into the chat box or into the Padlet and have a conversation, an opportunity for some questions. thank you for the honesty. Somebody saying that we have a decent curriculum CKLA, but you'd still have found to some and resistant to implicit. I think you mean explicit instruction. And the reality is explicit is going to be your key thing. Hi, Wendy. Let me figure out how to let you in. I did it, I think. Yes. Hi, Wendy.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Did you have a question or contribution?
Not yet.
Okay. So at this point, we're looking at our own districts. And I think that this hesitancy to embrace being explicit is really tough for people who aren't trained to do that. I think that how do I put this? I'm still trying to figure out why, because I was never trained not to. I went right from thinking I was going to be a high school English teacher to being trained explicitly within teaching kids with dyslexia. And the reality is that I think that too often people don't realize. I think one of the biggest keys that I want to make sure people come back to would be this one. That, yeah, we've got about 40% of the kids, and research will support this, that will learn even if we're not explicit. But a good, what is this, 50 to 65% of kids really need that. They really need that explicit instruction to succeed. Hello, is it pronounced Olshrey? She's muted. I'll come back. We need better instruction overall specific to dyslexic students' needs. And frankly, whoever put this in, my argument would also be, whoops, I can't highlight it, is that if we're meeting the needs of students with dyslexia, we'll be meeting the needs of all of our students who struggle with reading, because it is the basis and start. That if you can't get the words off the page, that's your first step. Now, if you can get the words off the page, remember our table earlier, then we need to be working on some comprehension and some other pieces. But that's our first step, is to be able to get the words off the page. And so I think that's again, the explicitness piece here that we want to focus on. And that they need more than anything. Let's go back to my chat, see if things have come in. Oh, there we go. Sherry says, for many students, F&P type programs are appropriate. Not all students require that level of explicit instruction. The reality is, when you say many, 40%, still the majority are not succeeding. And if you could look back to our NAEP scores, if we go back here, we've got it kind of, are we okay with 40% or less than 40% reading proficiently? So this number in pink is either at basic or below basic. If we're okay with that, then let's not give them explicit instruction. But if we want to move that needle, then we go back to, actually this one I didn't mean to click there. We go back to this and realize, you know what, it doesn't hurt them to give that explicit structured approach. They're not going to need as much practice, but how many kids think it's really cool to learn why there's a W in the word to, or why that hopping has 2 P's and hoping has 1? And now I did once teach a group of 4th graders who said, who cares why, it just isn't. But the reality is it's empowering. That if you know why that hopping is spelled with 2 P's and hoping is spelled with 1, you can attack and read and write words that follow that same pattern. It's about recognizing the patterns. And if they pick it up quickly, great. Give it to them, they've got it, they don't need to spend a lot of time with it. But nonetheless, it's empowering for them to know it and understand the logic behind the logic behind our language. Susan, I love how you say you didn't know that you weren't teaching them explicitly. That's a good question. I can't say whether or not you were. And I think that it all depends. There are some programs and some supports, and that's, you may have been. It depends on whether or not you were doing phonics explicitly or implicitly. And was it coming out of their reading, or was it something that you were never assuming that they could do something, and that making sure you taught them? And I think that that's one of the keys that I learned as well. So Susan's mentioned, letters and top tens, and yes, definitely. I think you're saying you didn't realize you weren't doing explicitly until you learned letters and top 10 tools. Those are both some great resources. There are a lot of others, like 95% Group is another teacher training organization. I think like Mindshift. I think there are a lot of others as well. So the key to success is to provide instruction appropriate, again, for each child. The right level of explicitness, yes. But if I give everyone at least a basis of that explicit, to say, here it's everyone, here's how it works. And then we give a lot more practice for those kids who need the more practice. So the instruction doesn't necessarily have to change, but the level of practice does. And that's what I've heard from many researchers, especially Jack Fletcher, who's talked a lot about what he calls preventing dyslexia. I would rather frame it as preventing the struggles that can be a response to or difficulty with reading as a result. Because frankly, I don't know if I could prevent my daughter or anybody the phonological struggles in oral language, but in her reading, yes, we can prevent that. And really, it's the amount of practice that needs to be differentiated more than anything else. I'm going to see if anything else has come up, because I think that at this point, after our last pause and reflect, there was an opportunity for questions. And I will see what else. Oh, there was one more thing. I can't let you go without providing you with the favorite tech tools from the students at Orbida, which is the Oregon branch of IDA. And so I will go ahead and put this here too. Seeing some more reflections in here. Thank you. So the link I just gave you, let's see if I can get there here. In the link itself, will take you to a tech tools, again, as I mentioned earlier, of what we need to do to support our students along the way while they're learning their reading and writing skills. So supporting their listening comprehension and using that as their strength. I've mentioned that there are some digital textbooks and audiobooks. This list came from students themselves, and these are their preferred. So this is the Student Empowerment Panel favorite assistive technology tools. So with links and a little bit of information about each of them. You can see if these are the top. These are apps and software. These are digital books, textbooks, audiobooks, etc. Is the Chromebook people have mentioned has some good tools as well. These are a reader pen that also has translations for other languages. LiveScribe they like because it will record lectures, although I think the C pen does that now too. And what else I like about this is some things to consider when choosing assistive technology. As somebody, I think Sherry mentioned, how the appropriateness, that especially when it comes to assistive technology, it's definitely not one size fits all. And here again, we need to explicitly teach them how to use it instead of just saying, here's this tool, and that they're going to need practice with it. And then here are some of their responses on why they're often resistant to it. They don't want their peers to know they struggle. They need multiple interventions and introductions to get comfortable with it. Again, lots of practice. They don't want to admit that they need help. Very common. And lastly, that they don't want to be viewed as different or learning challenged. So feel free to please add here. I think it's a great way for us to interact with each other. And I'll see if there's anything else into the chat box or Q&A. And I don't remember, I think I'm only supposed to have until until 1:55. So I'm going to leave us with this questions and my thank you and see if there's anything else coming in.